Picture a world before the steady, quiet hum of your kitchen refrigerator. For most of human history, we faced a profound, relentless problem, and that was mortality and decay. Everyday survival was literally a race against rot. Every single harvest, every slaughtered animal, every churn of butter was instantly under siege by microscopic forces of decomposition. So, to truly understand our ancestors, we have to look past the grand monuments and the famous battles. We need to look at the ingenious ways ordinary people fought back against nature by using nature itself. Welcome to this explainer on the ancient elements of preservation. I want you to plunge yourself into the sensory reality of the past. The smell of spoilage was a constant, looming threat, and because of that, ordinary people across the globe were forced to become masterful, empirical, thermodynamic engineers. The earth itself became a tool. As the poet Seamus Heaney so beautifully put it, it was kind black butter, melting and opening underfoot. Our ancestors ingeniously harnessed the raw natural elements around them, the cool earth, the blistering wind, the flowing water, and the biting ice, all to cheat rot and extend the life of their food.
Let's start with our first element, harnessing the desert wind. In the brutal heat of the ancient Middle East and Africa, the summer sun could easily push temperatures well past 104 degrees Fahrenheit. In that kind of environment, survival meant you had to engineer the blistering wind itself. Now, this lineage of evaporative cooling is incredibly ancient. We're talking about a timeline stretching from the earliest river valley civilizations of the Indus Valley and Old Kingdom Egypt all the way to the peak of the Persian Empire. This very technology anchored the cold chain of the ancient Silk Road, which is exactly what allowed life to flourish in such punishing terrain.
To really grasp the scale of this engineering, we just have to look at the Persian Yakhchal, which literally translates to ice pit. These were massive, domed structures that stood up to 2 stories tall. Their walls were incredibly thick, up to 2 meters at the base, and they were crafted from a very specific mortar called sarouge. Just listen to this recipe. By mixing sand, clay, lime, ash, goat hair, and egg whites, ancient builders created a highly specialized, heat-resistant, and completely water-resistant barrier. It is an absolute marvel of ancient material science.
So, how did it actually work? Let's walk through this brilliant passive cooling mechanism together. First, a wind catcher, known as a bajir, would capture those high-altitude desert breezes and funnel them downward. As that warm air traveled down, it passed directly over freezing underground water channels called qanats, causing rapid cooling. At the same time, the conical dome acted as a solar chimney, actively venting out the warm air at the very top. This constant pressure differential pushed freezing air into a subterranean pit, sometimes up to 5,000 cubic meters in volume, and that preserved ice straight through the blistering summer. It was a visionary economic anchor for those oasis cities along the Silk Road.
But what if you didn't have the vast institutional wealth of a Persian emperor? Well, shifting down to the micro scale, we find the zir pot. This was a localized household solution used by ordinary people for millennia. Interestingly, it was repopularized globally back in the 1990s by a Nigerian teacher named Muhammad Ba Abba. He actually won a Rolex award for mass distributing this ancient, life-saving technology to impoverished rural farmers, which just goes to show that sometimes the absolute most effective solutions are the oldest ones we have.
And here's the physics behind why it works so beautifully. When you place it in a shaded, breezy location, water slowly wicks through the porous outer terracotta pot. As the dry wind causes that water to evaporate, it actively draws heat away from the inner chamber. It's essentially an open-cycle refrigerator that drops the interior temperature by up to 10 degrees Celsius. This incredibly simple system extends the life of highly perishable produce from a mere 2 to 3 days to up to 3 entire weeks. For a household's food security, that is an absolute game changer.
Moving on to our second method, secrets of the earth. We're going to step away from the scorching deserts now and head into the cold, damp soils of Europe and North America to explore the earth itself as a subterranean larder. If you've ever stepped down into a historical root cellar, you know you're hit with a very precise sensory environment. It's dark, it's incredibly quiet, and it is heavily damp. See, the goal wasn't just to keep things cool at around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. It was absolutely crucial to maintain a staggering 90 to 95% humidity. Those unmortared brick or earthen floors intentionally wicked moisture right up from the soil. This prevented living root crops like your potatoes, carrots, and turnips from losing moisture, transpiring, and just shriveling up over the long, barren winter.
Now, for at least 3,500 years, ordinary people across Ireland and Scotland utilized the ultimate earthen storage, the peat bog. They would actually pack butter or animal fat into wooden kegs, or sometimes even animal bladders, and bury them deep in the black, wet peat. To this day, it remains one of the most widespread archaeological items we find in bogs.
The chemistry at play here is just staggering. Our ancestors empirically figured out what modern science has only recently confirmed. Peat bogs are low temperature, low oxygen, and highly acidic environments. That specific combination is incredibly hostile to decay. In fact, modern researchers have buried fresh meat in peat bogs and found that after 2 whole years, the pathogen and bacterial counts were practically identical to meat kept in a modern mechanical freezer. The bog was literally the ultimate prehistoric deep freeze.
But here's the fascinating part. This environment didn't just preserve the butter, it completely transformed it. Imagine the sensory experience of eating this food. Kept underground for months or even years, often without a grain of salt, the fat absorbed all the flavors of its surroundings. Food researchers who have actually recreated this process describe the resulting bog butter with flavor notes like animal, moss, gamey, and funky. What started purely as a survival tactic created a complex, highly valued, incredibly nutrient-dense luxury food.
Next up, let's explore our third element, the power of flowing springs. Crossing the Atlantic over to the 18th and 19th century American colonies and Appalachian homesteads, we can observe the sensory world of the stone springhouse. Basically, if you're lucky enough to have a spring on your property, you built a house over it, often before you even finished building your own home. The crucial point here is the systemic thermodynamics. Water has a remarkably high specific heat capacity. It's 4.184 joules per gram degree Celsius to be exact. But in simple terms, flowing water is an incredibly efficient convective heat sink. It rapidly pulls warmth away from anything submerged in it. A springhouse wasn't just a storage shed, it actively drained the heat right out of your perishables.
When you look inside, every single level of a springhouse's anatomy was brilliantly engineered for survival. They had these shallow concrete troughs lined with gravel to optimize the freezing water flow. Heavy stoneware crocks filled with raw milk and freshly churned butter were partially submerged right into that water, which stopped bacterial acidification dead in its tracks. Meanwhile, if you look up, the dry upper rafters were perfectly utilized to cure meats and age cheese. They were safe from pests and summer heat, all protected by thick stone walls banked directly into the cool hillside.
This brings us to our fourth chapter, the winter ice harvest.
To climax our narrative of cold, we have to look at the 19th century transition. This is where we go from localized, household survival tactics to a highly capitalized global trade of extraction, the commercial ice harvest. The labor behind this was treacherous, and it was truly backbreaking. Imagine waiting until midwinter, standing on a frozen New England pond with numb hands and sharp saws, just wrestling with blocks of ice that weighed 300 to 400 pounds each. The threat of men and horses falling through the ice and drowning in the frigid waters was constant. Sliding these massive, bone-crushing blocks was an incredibly dangerous, round-the-clock race against the weather.
Let's trace how this seasonal extraction process actually worked. First, in midwinter, those 12 to 18-inch thick grids of ice were sawed right out of the water. Then, come spring, they were hoisted into massive multi-story storage barns on the shoreline. Now, to make sure this natural winter ice survived deep into the sweltering summer, they packed the blocks with agricultural waste. They used thick layers of straw and sawdust, which acted as absolutely incredible insulators. Finally, when summer hit, this frozen water was loaded onto insulated ships and railcars to be sent out into the world.
The global reach of this trade was, frankly, astonishing. The philosopher Henry David Thoreau actually watched this harvest happening at Walden Pond, and he noted that this ice was being shipped out of Massachusetts and making its way down to the Deep South, out to the Caribbean, and even as far away as Calcutta, India. It completely revolutionized the fishing, brewing, and meatpacking industries worldwide. That is, at least until cheap, ultra-pure Norwegian glacier ice and eventually early mechanical refrigeration outcompeted the New England supply.
Finally, let's reflect on our last section, the forgotten cold.
The arrival of the mechanical refrigerator, electric freezers, and massive global supply chains ultimately erased these intricate, daily, sensory relationships we used to have with the natural elements. Today, we don't have to worry about the physics of the desert wind, or the dampness of the earth, or the chill of a flowing spring, just to ensure we have food to eat tomorrow. We have undoubtedly won the war against daily rot, but it makes you wonder, at what cost to our connection with the physical world? By conquering decay with just a simple plug and a hum, what profound ancient wisdom of the seasons, the earth, and the elements did we simply leave behind in the dark? I'd love for you to think about that the next time you open your refrigerator door.